On the date of October 28, 2010, Henry Louis Gates Jr. is given a public address located at the University of California in front of students and fellow professors on the topic of, quote, genealogy, genetics, and African American history. At the time of this public broadcast, Henry Louis Gates Jr. was a professor at the Alfonso Fletcher University and the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research. Keep in mind that he is also responsible for the cultivation of the site known as slavevoyages.org, in which I forced them to change their information 2 years ago by utilizing my research on publicly verifiable evidence against their conceptualism and conceptual arts. I updated my viewers about that portion of this topic in a live stream that I'll link up above right now. So, during his address or lecture or whatever you want to call it, he shared some vital information that not only exposes himself, but also exposes how people can be easily manipulated by way of social engineering experiments. Listen closely.
There was Alex Haley coming out of the blue, could go all the way to Africa. He could go to this ship that brought his African ancestors over, and then he went all the way back to Gambia. So I was totally jealous of Alex Haley. And so I had a profound and severe case of Ruth envy. But I figured, well, I'll never, only Alex Haley could do that, right? So I got to know Quincy Jones in 1999. Anthony Appia, my dear friend, and I edited the Africana Encyclopedia, and then we founded Africana.com, which we needed some investors, and by this time it's complicated, but I got to be friends with Quincy Jones, still a great friend of mine. And Quincy introduced me to Alex Haley. And more than that, Quincy, it turned out, was obsessed with genealogy as well. Quincy scored the music for Roots. So for Christmas, he would give people their family trees. So, you know, I thought about that, but there was nothing I could do about that. Well, here's a funny thing happened. You never know. The Bible says be careful what you wish for. In the year 2000, a young black geneticist named Dr. Rick Kittles, who at the time was teaching at Howard University, sent me a letter. He's now at the University of Chicago Medical School. And he said that he was asking various African-American men if they would submit themselves to this new test. And through this test, he could trace on your mother's line where in Africa you were from. Man, that was some serious stuff. And I said, yeah, I mean, I called him right away, and I said, definitely.
Now, at this point of the video, Henry was referring to a guy by the name of Rick Kittles, who is one of the co-founders of a genealogy DNA testing company called African Ancestry that's promoted strictly to people of color that believes they may have some African descent within their lineage. And so this company claims to be able to trace people's ancestral roots back to a specific present-day African country and tribe or ethnic group by way of a living being's saliva. Now, it's quite apparent that this task is merely impossible to accomplish in this day and age of technology. I mean, even the #1 genealogy DNA testing company in America, called Ancestry DNA, can't even do such a thing for their own customers. So, how can a new college graduate gain the funding possible to obtain access to biobanks of millions of people's DNA data without even meeting them in person? And how can these biobanks obtain millions of people's DNA data without them digging up the graveyards of billions of deceased people all over America and any other said place that they would love to connect you to? Keep in mind, companies in this fashion are very limited to only comparing your data with the data of other living people. So that has absolutely nothing to do with anyone's historical genetic makeup altogether. And And no matter how some people may feel about genealogy DNA tests, there are people out there warning folks about the entertainment surrounding genealogy DNA testing and genealogy DNA test results. And even Henry Louis Gates Jr. himself chuckled at the idea that genealogy DNA test results are in close proximity of the truth.
And he said that of all the people he'd written to, nobody was writing him back. And I couldn't figure out why, but I later found out why. So I said, would you want me to come to Washington? He goes, no, I'll come up to Harvard Square. It's where I was living. So about a week later, he showed up. And now, I've had many operations. I broke my hip when I was playing football when I was about 14. It was misdiagnosed by country doctors. I've had a zillion operations on my leg, right? So I know about having blood extracted. If you can see my veins is, you just look at a vial and blood pours out, right? I'm very easy to get my blood. Well, after half an hour, I realized that two things. That Dr. Rick Kittles is a brilliant geneticist, but he's not brilliant at extracting blood. I also realized why no other black male was stupid enough to let him come up to try to take their blood. Because that brother kept poking around, and I thought, damn, this Kunta Kinte stuff is hard work. How badly do I want to know where I'm from in Africa? But I really wanted to know. I'd wanted to know since I was 9 years old, so, let's go for it. So finally, see, at the time, you had to extract a lot of DNA in order to run the test. Now, you just swab your cheek or spit in a test tube, depending on the company that you use. We could talk about that a little bit later.
Now, it's very important to note that he states this at this very moment, because he then later debunks these processes by saying that you cannot tell what tribe someone was a part of historically by attempting either of these processes he just mentioned.
So it's very easy and it's very painless. So I waited and I waited and I waited. Rick Kittles went back to Washington. I waited for the result. And I didn't hear from him. So finally I called him. And you know how people do. He picked up the phone after I called him about 1 million times. He goes, oh man, I was just about to return your phone call. I said, Rick, what's up, man? Where am I from? In Africa. Where are my people? I want to jump on a plane and go. I thought I'd buy some land, get a fine little African sister, to hook up. I was single at the time, don't get me wrong. I'm still single. So he said, well, we had to run, your results were anomalous. And we had to run them many times. But we finally figured out where you're from. You are descended on your mother's side from the Nubian people. Now, all African Americans, not all African Americans, but many African Americans want to be descended from one or two ethnic groups. Either the Zulu, because the Chaka Zulu, and the Zulu kicked the English in the behind in the Boer Wars, right? Until they finally were overcome. But you want to be Zulu, or you want to be Nubian. Who are the Nubians? The Nubians were the black pharaohs. Right? The Nubians are in the Bible. The 25th dynasty was the Nubian dynasty. In Egyptian art, they always hated the Nubians. Nubians are always represented as darker. They were warring kingdoms. And Nubia ran from what today's Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, up to the Aswan Dam, the second cataract in the Nile River. And so a Nubian, and all these people wanted to be Nubians, descended from the black pharaohs. So my friend Molefi Asante, the founder of Afrocentricity, we argued a lot in public, but we're very good friends privately. I joke, every time he attacks me, I get a raise at Harvard, so it's cool. So I attack him, we do what Malcolm and Martin couldn't do. Set it up, and then we go split the money and slap five and go to Sylvia's, have fried chicken. Believe me, that's a much better way to function than hating each other. So I called Molefi first thing. I said, Molefi, I just got my results back. I am a Nubian. Where are you from? I am the true African prince. My friend Anthony Appiah, whose uncle was the Asantehene, the king of the Asante people. When Rick Kittle sent me a certificate announcing I was Nubian, Anthony Appiah looked at it and said, what a ton of rubbish. Now, why would he say that? Well, there's a slight problem with being either Zulu or Nubian if you're African American. You know what the problem is? None of our ancestors who came here in slavery came from South Africa, the Zulu people, or from Nubia. None, zero. Egypt is over here. The slaves came from the area from Senegal down to Angola. 97% of the slaves came from that region, all right? So, you know how long it would take them to walk from Sudan to Senegal or to Angola? It just didn't happen. So I looked at Anthony and I said, "You're just jealous." Because I am a Nubian prince. I didn't care. I had it framed. I put it up in my living room so everybody could see that I was from royalty. So I didn't think about it. I thought maybe it was strange. Maybe it was on a trade route. You know, there were great Muslim trade routes. You know, today, this is important for the students. In my time, we were taught that the Africans were these benighted people, and they were too stupid to build a boat or to be curious about the world and cross the Sahara Desert. It was rubbish. Africans were just as curious as anybody else. The Sahara Desert was a highway. It wasn't a barrier. So I thought, well, and there were great trade routes. So I thought maybe my Nubian descendant had come over and ended up being tricked by some white man and ended up in Maryland or Virginia or something. So that was cool. And if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one.
Now, I would like for you to keep in mind what he just stated here. He said, if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one. So in other words, he's informing everyone that he would not hesitate to create a detailed explanation about something that is not actually there to begin with. And he did in fact create his own explanation after he noticed what Rick Kittles and others were doing in order to produce these test results. So at this point of his address, he not only exposes genealogy DNA tests and genealogy DNA testing results, but he also exposes his fellow colleagues. And he didn't forget to add himself into the equation.
So, and by the way, you know, the Zulu thing, when Oprah was finally in the first series and we gave her DNA test, basically the next day she went to South Africa to announce that she was opening what became the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. She was in an auditorium of like 75,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles and I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man, she made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What, are you crazy? So anyway.
Let me leave you with some thoughts here.
Okay, please do.
There's a section here on race and color, which is another thing with the variation of what we have in the world. Just a point I want to make. When European anthropologists started running through Africa and started describing what they saw, their urge was to say, everyone in Africa is this thing, and they have dark skin, woolly hair, and that is a thing. And they called it a race, and they called it the Negroes, okay? And this is our attempt to classify into few categories something that might actually, in real life, be on a spectrum. We know that the human species began in Africa. And everybody who populates everywhere else in the world came out of Africa to do that. What that tells you is that the genetic diversity within Africa as the origin of our species is greater than it is between any other two people anywhere else in the world. But because the anthropologists were not thinking genetic diversity, they're thinking skin color. they put them all in one bin. But if you have the most genetic diversity, then in practically every way humans vary, you would find the extreme of that in the African continent. Where would you find the tallest people in the world? Watusi tribe of Africa. How about the shortest people in the world?
Pygmies.
The Pygmies. Not even that far away.
Right.
Geographically. They have the same skin color, so the Europeans said these are one group of people, one race. Where might you find the slowest people in the world? Well, no one looks for them. Where would you find, there's no races to find the slowest people. How about the fastest people? Africa. Okay? People of African descent have dominated the long distance as well as the sprint, two completely different physical abilities. Oh, but they're all dark-skinned people, they're all Negroes. Okay? Where would you likely find the dumbest person in the world? Africa. How about the smartest person in the world? Africa.
How about the Egyptians?
The
From
Europeans
Africa.
did not look for people smarter than they were. Okay? And to this day, where they find evidence where that might have been the case, you have people saying aliens did it. Egypt is, of course, in Africa.
Yeah.
A brilliant civilization. Oh my gosh. While Europeans were still either disemboweling heretics or whatever the hell they were doing, even before that, thousands of years ago. So my point is, if you don't look for it and you don't find it and you're going to create a map of humans of the world, you're going to put yourself at the top. That's what you're going to do. And you're going to write things like this. Who do you want to hear from? Thomas Jefferson or Francis Galton?
Jefferson.
Jefferson, 1785. Speaking of the Negroes, comparing them by their faculties of memory, reason, and imagination, it appears to me that in memory, they are equal to the whites. In reason, much inferior, as I think one could scarcely be found capable of tracing and comprehending the investigations of Euclid. And in imagination, they are dull, tasteless, and anomalous.
What is Euclid?
I honestly don't know how many Euclid-fluent white people Jefferson knew in the original American colonies. Euclid invented geometry. Okay, Euclidean geometry is ancient Greece. And his books still exist to this day. So he's saying the black slaves don't know Euclid, can't figure out Euclid.
Well, they haven't been educated.
Well, regardless,
The whole
how
thing is so
many
ridiculous.
white farmers in 1785 USA
Also.
knew Euclid?
Yeah,
No.
zero.
Okay. Okay. But whatever were his observations and objections to black people, he had no hesitation continually mating with at least one of them, producing 6 children. So you know what I did here? Then there's a guy who wrote a whole book comparing black people and white people, a book that was used into the 1960s. It was called The Origin of Races by Carlton Kuhn. He wrote, if Africa was the cradle of mankind, which he recognizes, it was only an indifferent kindergarten. Europe and Asia were our principal schools. So these are people putting themselves at the top. He's white, so he's got to put white people at the top. Then I thought, suppose anthropologists were black racists instead of white racists.
One of the main methods of mind control used by our programmers is creating division. One of the many ways this is done is by having 2 people of the same fraternity act as opposition to one another. This method is used to disguise the members' connection to a like-minded goal using conflict. This is done in entertainment, religion, consumerism, sports and politics. But one of the oldest and most successful means of creating division has always been the concept of race. But what is race? Are we truly different? And if so, how?
Rollo, hey, baby.
Hey,
Come here, give me some of that sugar, Daddy.
So this whole time you guys have been working together?
Yeah,
Yeah, silly. I told you I had it covered.
I'm confused. Me too. I thought Ann Coulter hated everybody.
Who, Ann? No, man. She just do that to get that redneck money. Let me tell you something about Ann. When a nigga need a nemesis, she helps me out, and I help her back. She a down-ass bitch.
Oh, you think I like going out there and saying this ridiculous shit?
If so many things in this reality are being manipulated as we have seen, why do we believe we can rely on the historical narrative we were given? Furthermore, have you ever asked yourself or your parents why black people are so hated? Most if not all cultures have some form of racism and derogatory term for the darker members of their society. Why was black people's history systematically destroyed or edited? Maybe you have never questioned the mainstream narrative. This series is not created with the intent to promote racism or any Afrocentric narrative. Neither is it created to make black or indigenous people exalted or victims. We suggest completing this series in full before coming to a conclusion and would like to make a disclaimer that most if not all black activists are created COINTELPRO operatives just like many others featured on this channel. They are also not exempt from death hoaxes. Many of them are Freemasons, and anyone who gives you a portion of this knowledge without addressing the full truth is either misinformed or possibly a Freemason or COINTELPRO operative themselves based on their popularity and influence. And if so-called black people have had their identities stolen as many have claimed throughout the years, technically that would make them colonizers, Masons, Jews, Vikings, Romans and so forth. This would then change the entire narrative of history as we know it, but in many ways put a lot of things into perspective. We will explain why these people have been systematically targeted over the years. To begin, we are to believe that people that would be considered black by today's standards were advanced in astronomy, botany, military and science, ruled the ancient world and one day just vanished? The second narrative would have you believe all melanated people come from one continent and the majority of them were not relevant in history and lived primitively in Africa until discovered a little over 2,000 years ago. That instead these were the people described in history and they either descended from apes, gods or angelic white races of aliens. This is not hyperbole, this is the actual narrative. We cannot rule any possibility out, but let's unpack this history. Race as it's used today is a legal status and is not used to define one's genetic existence but rather to classify groups of people by region, nationality, socioeconomic status or affiliation. People being identified by skin color is a relatively new concept. Prior to this, people were identified by nation, tribe, customs, etc. These are some of the names of the tribes of people referred to in the Bible. We won't go into debate on which of these people would be considered black or not because there would have been no reason to distinguish them by skin color in these times. However, considering the fact that we consider someone like Barack Obama a black man, I believe it's safe to assume that by today's standards we would consider most if not all ancient indigenous people black. But what is black? The word, black, can be traced back to its Proto-Indo-European origins through the word, black, which meant pale, wan, colorless, or albino. Black was incorporated into Old French as blanc, Italian and Spanish as blanco, bianca, bianco, bianchi. Albinism is a congenital condition characterized in humans by the partial or complete absence of pigment in the skin, hair and eyes. Albinism does not only affect black people. All races can experience albinism. This is interesting because using our common sense we can conclude this implies most people have some amount of melanin. It is possible that whiteness is a result of eugenics and there is even evidence of this as we will see later in this series.
Notice, if you will, the half-caste child. And there are ever-increasing numbers of them. Now, what is to happen to them? Are we to allow the creation of an unwanted third race? Should the coloreds be encouraged to go back to the black? Or should they be advanced to white status and be absorbed in the white population. Now, time and again, I am asked by some white man, if I marry this colored person, will our children be black? And as Chief Protector of Aborigines, it is my responsibility to accept or reject those marriages. Here is the answer. 3 generations. Half-blood grandmother, quadroon daughter, octoroon grandson. Now, as you can see, in the 3rd generation, or 3rd cross, no trace of native origin is apparent. The continuing infiltration of white blood finally stamps out the black color. The Aboriginal has simply been bred out. Now, we come to the Moor River Native Settlement. Ladies, most of you are familiar with our work here, the training of domestic servants and farm laborers. I would like to thank you for your continuing support. Hundreds of half-caste children have been gathered up and brought here to be given the benefit of everything our culture has to offer. For if we are to fit and train such children for the future, they cannot be left as they are. And in spite of himself, the native must be helped.
Colorism is defined as prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. Is it possible that black people are the original creators of racism? After all, genetics would be more important to those of a royal bloodline or nobility. In addition, colorism would be of a higher significance to those in a population with darker-skinned individuals. You might be wondering, are we implying the Europeans were people of color? Most scholars and even Afrocentrics will often attach Caucasians to European and Greco-Roman history. And just like with flat Earth and other concepts, any attempt to mention the black presence in European or Roman history will be met with condescension and befuddlement. However, upon doing your research, you will notice many figures in history we know as pale white people are actually described as swarthy, tawny, ruddy, etc. All of these words imply a tan to dark brown complexion. Some of us are familiar with the popular 2006 action film 300 starring Gerald Butler as Spartan King Leonidas. The plot revolves around King Leonidas's battle with Xerxes' Persian army at the Battle of Thermopylae. But how many of us know what the Persians and Spartans really looked like? The film was based on the 1998 comic series of the same name by American comic book writer, novelist, and screenwriter Frank Miller. Miller is known for creations such as Sin City and The Dark Knight Returns. Why would this Irish Catholic man depict the Spartan army as black men, unless he knew something we did not? While we are on the subject, let's move on to Europe. Feel free to pause the video if you would like to read each entry thoroughly, but we will be fast-forwarding through this section for the sake of time. This is less about skin color and more about bloodline. As we've proven in earlier videos, most celebrities are related in one way or another, many of whom are members of the royal families by blood. So, whether you believe blacks held status in these nations or not, the question is, why were they left out of history in the first place? The answer might be related to the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of wars between the Catholic Church and the current Islamic rule. It would then make sense that the Catholic Church would erase all mention of the Moorish Empire, and they are often associated with the Islamic rulership. What is a Moor? Moor is a word used similarly to how the word black is used today. It can refer to an Islamic group, a specific group of dark-skinned people, or dark-skinned people in general. However, Moors may be known by a variety of names and affiliations throughout history.
Now to begin, we're gonna start with the Moors. Black history has been suppressed, and I think we could all learn from this video. The Moors are indigenous, enlightened, melanated peoples. Contrary to popular belief, the term is not synonymous with Islamic or any specific Arab or African religion, civilization, or ethnicity. But this is the term that I'm going to be using in this presentation to refer to black people, or what we know as African American. The origin of the English term Moor is the Greek word mavro, which literally means black, blackened, or charred. It has been used to describe black for things such as the Mavri Thalassa, which refers to the Black Sea. The Moors have a rich history, though we're never told about this. The Moors had high civilizations in Egypt, Sumer, Persia, Canaan, Greece, and the ancient Indus Valley.
America is Islamic in foundation, so history would have to be rewritten in order to hide this information. Moors were the ones who navigated Christopher Columbus's expedition to the Americas, and some would even argue that Christopher Columbus himself was a Moor. Also, his name was not even Christopher Columbus. I would not get too caught up on whether he was white or black, because it might be possible that these people did not really exist in the same manner described to us in school.
How many people really realize what happened within the Jewish community in Spain in 1492?
Well, this is a mystery that God has kept for a long time. Because we've said that Christopher Columbus is from Italy. No, he's from Portugal. No, he's from Spain. Well, where is he really from? Well, they say that he was from Genoa, Italy, but his Italian writing is horrible. But his Castilian is perfect, So, so be it as it may, recently there is a growth, an exponential growth of discoveries that point to the fact that Christopher Columbus, first of all, his name is not Columbus. His name, and not because I'm Hispanic with Sanchez surname and Martinez and so forth, but his name is Colón. And so in Spanish we have it right, Cristóbal Colón. So his real name is Salvador Zarco. All right, but now recently we've discovered that Christopher Columbus, Cristóbal Colón, was known as a quote-unquote Marrano. Marrano? The Marranos are those that were forced to convert to Roman Catholicism, that were Sephardim, and then they were forced to eat pork, which is very unkosher, and then they were called Marrano.
The viewer's attention is focused on a picture of a copper-colored middle-aged man that appears to be dressed as a sailor, being as though we can see that he appears to be occupying a sailboat with associates far off behind him. What's important to note here is that this image is a fresco-style painting that was created by an Italian painter of color named Domenico Zampieri between the years of 1628 and 1630. And according to Britannica Encyclopedia, Domenico was one of the, quote, leading practitioners of Baroque classicism in Rome and Bologna. This particular painting was completed during a time period where Domenico's works were considered to be, quote, less acceptable by Rome.
There were Muslims on Columbus's ship and traveling with explorers all around the New World. Heard of the United States Marine Corps song from the halls of Montezuma
to the shores of Tripoli.
That's
yes.
It. Well, Tripoli is in modern-day Libya, and the reason that's in the song is because we were allies with them. And as a thank you for helping them deal with piracy issues, the Marine Corps was gifted a sword, which has now become the saber of the Marine Corps dress uniform.
What? So many people don't know that.
And Thomas Jefferson was also hosting dinners at the end of Ramadan for Muslim diplomats in the White House.
Listen here. I certainly love that old German song. Ach, du lieber August. But that's not a German song. That's an Arabian song. The Moors brought it to Spain, where it's now used in Spanish churches. The Germans have given it to us in this form. Now I suppose you're going to tell me that Dixie hasn't anything to do with the South. It hasn't. Dixie was not in the South. Dixieland was originally a farm on Long Island owned by a man by the name of John Dixie. He befriended so many runaway slaves before the Civil War that his place, Dixie's land, became a sort of a paradise to them. It wasn't until the songwriters came along that Dixie was transplanted to the South.
Roadside attraction, a miniaturized version of the similarly off-kilter tower in Pisa, Italy, plopped into the middle of a quiet north suburb. But not only does the tower have a longer history now than you might suspect, it also has some unexpected historical treasures hidden in its crown. Brandis Friedman has that story.
In north suburban Niles, this tipsy tower on Touhy Avenue hides a historical surprise. 5 bronze bells, 3 of which appear to be centuries old.
This is the oldest one. This is, the inscription says 1623. And we have kind of the standard Ave Gratia Plena Dominus tecum on the bell and a Latin Catholic prayer. And we have some nice decorations here. There's one on the side here, the crucifix, and here we see the name of the bellcaster. This is the second largest bell, and it was, the inscription says that it was cast in 1747, and it references the Archbishop Ludovic.
The venerable bells were rediscovered in 2017 after the 1934 tower was sold to the Village of Niles by the Leaning Tower YMCA. As part of its ongoing restoration, the village hired the group Chicago Bell Advocates to research the bell's origins. They say much of the information was right there on the bells themselves.
The inscription basically says that the bell was cast and paid for by the people of Cavezzo, Italy, the St. Giles congregation.
remember a while back when I put out a video showing you proof that they unearthed an Egyptian temple while they were building a dam in Tennessee? That video got over 2 million views, and so many of you came to me afterwards looking for a follow-up. Well, I got to work and found something that's going to blow your mind. This book was published by a U.S. Senator from Kentucky in 1824, and it was the first real published history of Kentucky. Copies of this book that haven't been censored are very rare to find, and this one cost me over $1,000 to bring to you today. But once you see what's in it, you'll know why they worked so hard to keep it away from you. Here we see that the principal nations of the eastern continent which have contributed to the people of North America and Kentucky were the Adelans and Coutans, who came easterly through the Atlantic Ocean, and the Istakans and Augusians, who came westerly through the Pacific Ocean. The nations which peopled the western shores of the eastern continent were the Gomerians in Europe and the Atlantes in Africa. The Atlantes formed a powerful empire in North Africa, which gave laws to many nations. Numerous revolutions and invasions took place among those nations, until at last the Atlantes of Africa united them all by conquest in one powerful empire, which extended over North Africa, Spain, France, Italy, parts of Greece, Asia, etc., and lasted many ages under several dynasties and emperors. It was during the splendor of this empire that America was discovered by some bold navigators who were led by the trade winds to the West Indies, in a few days from the Atlantic Islands. They called them the Antilla Islands, which meant before the land, and America was called Atala, or the Great Atlantes. He goes into great depth about these colonies, the different peoples, how they split up into the different tribes, how the colonies were eventually cut off from the rest of the world, and the Egyptians, many hundreds of years later, found them again, reestablished contact, and were eventually repulsed. So this is not just a general overview, it goes into great depth, and I will be reading more from this in future videos. It's very interesting that this initial belief that people came from North Africa to the Azores and then North America, where they had a colony, matches perfectly with the beliefs of the scholar who did the work on the temple in Tennessee. And he describes how they came from North Africa to the Azores and then to the area around Miami, Florida, where they named many of the different areas, such as Savannah. Savannah comes from Suwana, the Egyptian hieroglyphs meaning the place of trade. You can see that represented in this antique map with mound sites that are up the coast of Florida, culminating around the area where the river lets out in Savannah, Georgia, and traveling up that river to eastern Tennessee, where there's a huge colony, which is where the temple in Tennessee was found. And one very important point I'd like everybody to make note of is that to write this book in 1824, there were no previous sources. They went out into the field and asked the real histories and opinions of the First Nations people and tried to record them accurately. This is before 200 years of propaganda and historical revisionism that modern historians and archaeologists are all guilty of. Now I know that there's going to be people jumping in on my comments, attacking me and trying to debunk me with the 30 seconds of propaganda that they read on Wikipedia. So before we get there, let me just say that I personally have no problem admitting that people, ancient peoples of North Africa, were fully capable of sailing and creating colonies. Why do these people have to be so goddamn racist and ignore history? The modern PC environment is all about dividing us, but in reality, we went back and forth all over the world, talked, communicated, and shared ideas. That's just what humans do. I'll be doing a lot more content on these in the future, but for now, if you'd like more information, I'll be making these available on my website. So go to my website, jump on the mailing list to let you know when they're available, and just don't be afraid of the truth. The truth is awesome.
Florida is Eden. From its very inception as a European colony, Florida was likened to the Garden of Eden. In fact, on Columbus's third voyage to the so-called New World, he professed the lands he encountered around the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico to be the one and only earthly paradise. Interesting how they leave that part out of history class, yet endlessly subject us to Arab-centric propaganda furthered by countries who would have virtually no global relevance save for the fact that they erroneously claim host to the birthplace of the Abrahamic religions. Up until World War II, it was not uncommon to hear Florida professed as the original Garden of Eden, as Arab-centric propaganda had not been cemented into our school systems. Land advertisements and articles of the pre-war eras reflect a seemingly widespread acknowledgement of this fact. A 1912 booklet, distributed by the Tampa Board of Trade, professed, "Florida climate proves that original Garden of Eden was located there." On the 8th of February, 1910, the Tampa Tribune printed that, quote, "The Garden of Eden was in Florida." The Tampa Tribune similarly printed the following on March 11th, 1919. General Richard E. Edmonds is correct. Only the extremely ignorant and supremely jealous now deny that here was the original Garden of Eden. Not only was the original Garden of Eden in Florida, much more to the point, it is still here, and there are no rivals. End quote. Dozens and dozens of articles and land advertisements echo the same consensus. Mesopotamia translates to the land amidst the rivers. In Genesis, 4 rivers went out of Eden: the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel, also known as the Tigris. Of the modern Mesopotamia's erroneously attributed rivers, only the Tigris and Euphrates flow today, and the identities of the other 2, the Pison and the Gihon, are entirely up for debate. Keep in mind, within the mainstream narrative, the area of Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, labeled the cradle of civilization, required extensive irrigation to render their largely barren land remotely fertile, which automatically disqualifies it from the candidacy for Eden. Another truth, which is lost on scholars, is the fact that these 4 rivers came to a single head. This feature is not to be found on any of the eastern continents. Believe it or not, it is in Lake Seminole, located exactly on the Florida-Georgia line, that we find the planet's only true 4-headed river system. The 4 physical rivers of Eden are the Chattahoochee, Fish Pond Creek River, the Spring Creek River, and the Flint River. These 4 ancient names were carried to Asia on the Ark during the flood and reassigned to the 4 closest major rivers. This is how Eden was lost. But the Gulf Stream persisted, and thus the same unique ecosystems of Florida took hold again, and paradise was restored. This fact was uncovered by Christian theologian and lawyer L.V.E. Calloway, Florida's Republican candidate for governor in 1936, who was ordained a Baptist preacher at only 17 years old. Calloway was sent on a mission from God by none other than Dr. Brown Landone, renowned Florida mystic and author. Landone instructed Calloway to move from central to northern Florida after initiating him into what was called the Order of Melchizedek. After relocating to the Apalachicola River area, just outside of Tallahassee, Calloway found that of the 28 trees identified in the Bible, 27 of them grew in this unique Florida River Valley. We will return to the research of E.E. Calloway later on. Mississippi translates to either gathering in of all the waters, or Father of Waters. Hearing the words Father and Waters together should prick the ears of anybody who is familiar with Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Meso is the same phonetic root found in the words Mexico and Mississippi. Mesopotamia could justly be referred to as Mexopotamia or Mississippitamia. Assuming the 4 rivers of Eden to be in Florida, we assert the original Nile River and its deltas, nicknamed the River of Isis, to be the Mississippi River and its deltas. The name Mississippi actually contains the name of the Egyptian goddess Isis within it. An alternate identity of the River Nile has been entertained by a multitude of freethinkers, including some of the very first European settlers, slaves, the founders of the Mormon religion, and modern revisionist movements such as Tartaria and Old World, as well as the Black Israelite movement. At the very least, most people should be able to agree that the Mississippi River, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean are the mirrored equivalent to the Nile and Mediterranean Sea. The land of the crescent moon. For those not yet convinced, you are about to be. If the Gulf of Mexico is the true Fertile Crescent, it would thus be the home of at least one Abrahamic religion. Now, Islam actually brandishes the Fertile Crescent, symbolized by the crescent moon and the planet Venus, the two luminaries which govern over fertility, as its primary symbol. Well, what if I told you that Islam actually originated in the Gulf of Mexico? For it was certainly present in the Americas well before Columbus's arrival. Don't believe me? Take a look at these so-called Native Americans. The Muskogee tribe of the southeast United States, also known as Creek or Seminole, bear the same phonetic root, mus, as Muslim, as do the native Muspa of Florida. Muskogees dress in a distinctly Moorish style that well suits the Moorish architecture scattered around the southeastern United States and Caribbean islands. Not only do the Muskogee dress in what could be described as Muslim garb, but the Muskogee Confederacy even employed a crescent moon and star insignia identical to that of Turkey and Morocco. In fact, dozens of nations use a variation of the Moorish crescent, and if I were searching for the remnants of a pre-Columbian, transatlantic empire in the Americas, that's where I would start. With this understanding, I'd like to show you a supposedly satirical map displaying the divvying up of America should the Central Powers have defeated us in World War I. This map was printed by Life magazine. The Ottoman Turks were explicitly given claim to Florida. Interesting, to say the least. When we examine the overtly Turkish architecture of Tampa Bay, we see this is no coincidence. What if I told you Florida actually has a Turkey key, sitting directly next to Mormon key? I think we should also re-examine the name of the islands, Turks and Caicos, which we are told are named purely for a fez-wearing cactus, nothing to do with the Turks. New Smyrna, Florida, a 1767 Ottoman colony, is, however, legitimately named after a Turkish city. So, is this map showing us an alternate destiny or an alternate history? A little-known fact, the Muskogee tribe of Florida actually allied with Montezuma, the Aztec emperor, against his colonial foes. Another undeniable link between the Gulf of Mexico and a pre-Columbian Muslim empire is the fact that the language family to which the Aztec languages belong is the Otomanguean family. Otomanguean is Ottoman. The crescent moons of the Gulf of Mexico are indeed Islamic in origin. Do you know where the word Caribbean comes from? It is named for the Carib people who were native to its islands as well as the Gulf and Florida. Carib is nearly the same word as Arab, and this is no coincidence. If they had named the Caribbean Sea the Caribic Sea, the truth would likely have been too obvious. This area is perhaps most famous for piracy, which, all propaganda aside, is a largely Arabic or Semitic culture. The two most pirated areas of the colonial world were the Islamic Barbary coast of Africa and the potentially Islamic Gulf and Caribbean. The pirate cutlass was inspired by the Arabic scimitar. The word pirate comes from the word pyro, as in pyrite, meaning flaming or red. This is the same adjective from which the Phoenicians get their name, as do the Rus, Vikings, of Eastern Europe and Asia. This gives new meaning to names like Barbarossa, meaning red beard. The word Mecca is rooted in the words Olmec and Mexico. In fact, when Europeans first arrived, the native Floridians even had a massive quote-unquote mosque made from stone in Florida named Tolo Mecco. Unsurprisingly, the words Muskogee, Meskwaki, and Muskogo all bear the word mosque within them. For those that don't know, officially, Seminoles are Native Americans mixed with both runaway slaves and Irish, Scottish, and Welsh renegades, often bearing names like Mick and Mac. But we are told it is a coincidence that this tribe goes by the name Miccosukee. Micco is the same phonetic thread from which we get Mezzo, Mexo, and yes, Mecca. Cuba is the Kaaba, the land of the cube. The island of Cuba is actually the tail of the largest Q in the world. Its name is no coincidence. Many Seminoles escaped persecution to Cuba and settled there, some temporarily and others permanently. Cuba is also the name of a city in Alabama. Florida, with its overtly Moorish architecture in all corners of the state, has cities with names such as Baghdad, Crescent City, Golden Crescent, Tallahassee, a city which has been referred to as the Rome, Jerusalem, and Athens of ancient America by multiple scholars. Moorhaven, Isla Morada, Arcadia, New Smyrna, Marathon, Zephyr Hills, Naples, Venice, St. Petersburg, Alachua, Bowell County, El Portal, El Jardín, Garden Nile, Yalafa, Alafaya, Malabar, and many more. In Georgia, named for the same George as the country Georgia, previously part of both the Ottoman and Tartarian empires, we also find a plethora of Moorish architecture, as well as cities with names like Bethlehem, Athens, Hephzibah, Rome, Salem, Smyrna, Cairo, Arabi, Zebulon, The Rock, Albany, Alpharetto, Alapaha, Hiram, Jachin, Zion, Moreland, Ephesus, Tallapoosa, Dallas, and O Mecca. In Alabama, with its distinctly Arabic prefix, we find cities such as Arab, Andalusia, Athens, Dothan, Joppa, Sardis City, Boaz, Troy, Alexandria, Alexander City, Alabaster, Al-Tuna, At-Allah, Ta'ala-Dega, and Mobila, the true name for mobile, which is actually Alabama backwards. And of course a plethora of Moorish architecture. In Mississippi, the land of the river Isis, we find Mount Olive, Carthage, Beulah, Gilead, and another Athens. In Tennessee, Medina, Memphis, Athens, Carthage, Alexandria, Moscow, Smyrna, Tallahassee. South Carolina, which was initially part of Spanish La Florida, touts the unmistakably Arab crescent moon as its flag to this very day. We are told originated as a Confederate symbol. In Louisiana, where the river Isis terminates, we find Amite, New Iberia, Lake Maurepas, Des Allemands, Allah, Arcadia, Athens, Homer, Alexandria, Iota, Sicily, Delhi, Venice. Did you know, however, that New Orleans, the mouth of the river Isis, is nicknamed Crescent City? They say this is due to a crescent-shaped bend in the river, but this excuse is nonsense. Old sewer lids from the city, displaying Islamic iconography, easily debunk this. Arkansas, named for the ancient wooden ark ships, which traced its abundant Mississippian coastline, contains the most biblical city names of any American state. In this one state we find Antioch, Athens, Bethel, Bethlehem, Beulah, Canaan, Corinth, Damascus, Egypt, Gethsemane, Goshen, Hebron, Jericho, Jerusalem, Jordan, Lebanon, Mount Judah, Mount Nebo, Mount Olive, Nimrod, Palestine, 4 Salems, 4 Shilohs, Siloam, Smyrna, Zion, Lepanto, and my favorite, the most telling of all, Arkadelphia. Texas is the Lone Star State. That lone star is either Sirius, the star in the east, or Venus, the morning star, both of which are especially revered by Islam, and trade places as the star in the clutches of the crescent moon. South Carolina is the crescent, and Texas is the star. In Texas, we find Palestine, Iran, Memphis, Abilene, Hebron, Nazareth, Dallas, Alamo, Odessa, Athens, Zephyr, Rome, Corsicana, and Ahamuda.
It appears many countries had populations of darker-skinned people. Something happened in the past couple hundred years that drastically changed this. And there has been an obvious attempt to hide and alter this information. In order to hide the history of black people, they all would have to be removed from the mainstream narrative. One of the ways they sought to do this was making all melanated people descendants of the continent of Africa despite the obvious evidence of their presence throughout the world. In the late 70s they created a television series called Roots named after the book written by Alex Haley. This book was sold as an autobiographical tale of the author's genealogy traced back to an African slave brought to America during the transatlantic slave trade. Alex Haley was sued in 1978 by Harold Corlander. Corlander accused Haley of plagiarizing his book, The African, the case was settled in Corlander's favor. Despite the obvious plagiarism, the History Channel recreated the series in 2016. It's highly unlikely the transatlantic slave trade occurred in the fashion described in history, as it would be nearly impossible to achieve, and there is no hard evidence to suggest this ever took place. Slavery, sharecropping and indentured servitude did exist, but this was not limited to one racial group or skin tone.
Many natives of both North and South America were home to many indigenous black peoples, such as in New York, in Mexico, Wisconsin, in San Francisco, Southern California. They were in Mississippi, and in Oklahoma. This is a depiction of a black native from Terra Fire, or like we have mentioned earlier, Terra Firma, throughout South America. The Caribbean islands were home to the native black peoples. Black people have been on this land far before Christopher Columbus ever stepped foot, if he even existed. We have maps and depictions of Africa, with many towns and cities that seem to be castles. I also have shown you sources in the last chapter that most Egyptians were not of pure Black Lemurian origin. So why are we fed this lie of Africa? It is to attach the identity of the native peoples of ancient America with a faraway land so that they may be enslaved mentally. This whole process was about erasing the last age, and these cultures were high civilizations that preserved the knowledge of the ages before. Therefore, the rulers that be forced the Spanish, English, and French nations to conquer these lands at all cost. They were funded by the same hidden hand, the first new global corporation, also known in history as the East Indian Trading Company, the first global national corporation. Now remember, the Phoenicians, or as we now know the Akkadians, added 1,000 years to the calendar. So, these two histories are interlinked, and we can think of this time as the new takeover of the old Aryan world. A really interesting post on Stolen History that talks about how slave houses in the South were actually owned by the Cherokee, the people who got expelled from Rome after it was conquered by the Phoenicians. Quote, Cherokee, who were living in Western-style houses, the Cherokee were living inside of antebellum mansions before settlers turned them into plantations. The antebellum mansions look like Roman palatial estates and are covered in pagan symbols and have pagan murals inside of them. Truth is, they've been hiding the real history of North America for centuries, and only the wisest see through the lies. Quote, all roads lead to Rome, Georgia. It is called Rome because that is what the Cherokee called their land. To their dying breath, they claimed to be from Rome and were Romans. They were expelled from their land and lost their property in the 1830s. This is what we're told in the schools, that the North attacked the South and over 600,000 people died over fighting for slavery. If we were to look further, we may find that some things don't add up completely. For one, the star forts. They want you to believe that around 150 forts were created basically in the 19th century. And trust me, I've been to one of these. These things look old. We have a video on star forts, but basically, the idea is that they put cannons on these bastion forts as naval strategy for enemy ships. This idea that cannons can shoot ships from miles away from iron balls skipping on the water has yet to be proven, and seems like a complete cover-up. Also, in our star fort video, we show evidence of pumps and underground buried sections. And even when you read the official narrative, there's always something that happened that ended in complete destruction of these forts. I'm sure that these forts were used by the British, Spanish, and French, but they did not build them.
What if the real goal of the Crusades was the creation of the concept of religion itself? What if it was a form of rebranding for Jewish Kabbalistic magic and Moorish Islamic alchemy and mysticism? If wars for power between different factions of people did take place, the religious aspect was probably added to the narrative later on. Maybe there wasn't some big conspiracy to hide history, but instead, there was a collaborative, methodical, logical decision made to do so in order to maintain order and control. It's possible the original sciences were converted into religions where only the initiated would be able to understand and practice them in the original manner intended. So even with all the clues of a past civilization that is contrary to indoctrination we have received, we still would not perceive nor understand the symbolism right before us. Associated groups still practice the same pagan rituals of old under the guise of Christianity, and it's highly possible the effort to end paganism was done as a means to have higher influence over the people. Which would explain the next few generations of forced indoctrination.
I'm trying to tell you exactly why they called these particular people, our ancestors, freedmen. Here's why. Freedmen is a religious term created by the Quakers. Think about it. I'll explain why here, but listen to the timeline. The Virginia Company of London sent a group of people called the Congregation for Propagating the Gospel in Foreign Parts to the southeastern side of these lands, or eastern side of these lands. Okay? So what you're looking at is not a school. Not the schools that we're used to. What you're looking at are churches. Freedmen is a religious term that was created by the Quakers. Okay? What they're trying to do is state that they are, okay, let me break it down. These schools were not taking place to teach math and science, stuff like that. No. They were definitely telling you everything that was in the Bible. Think about this. No other books but the Bible. Freedmen. The only thing that was taught inside of these schools, in these freedmen schools, was Bible study. The reason why they called these people freedmen is because they wanted to free their mind, okay, from what they were originally used to and already accustomed with. This is called a form of indoctrination. This was a social engineering experiment.
The Crusade soldiers Paupers Camillitones Christi Templique Salomonici, or the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, also known as the Order of Solomon and the Knights Templars, became the Freemasons, who still influence the world to this day. What comes to mind is the 2010 film The Book of Eli starring Denzel Washington. A post-apocalyptic story about a white warlord named Carnegie and his attempts to steal the last Bible on Earth from the protagonist Eli, played by Denzel Washington. He does so in hopes of gaining greater control over Earth's remaining survivors in his small town. It's also mentioned in the film that the Bible is the King James Version. As we can see, there's an obvious connection between the Romans, Catholics, Moors, Jews and Aryans. Was racial confusion and division created to hide this connection? Or are certain groups of people impersonating another? But let's pause here and discuss Aryans, as this will be relevant later on. Aryanism in the religious context is a Christological doctrine from Alexandria, Egypt. Aryan theology holds that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father, with the difference that the Son of God did not always exist but was begotten within time by God the Father. Therefore Jesus was not co-eternal with God the Father. Aryanism is an ideology of racial supremacy which views the supposed Aryan race as a distinct and superior racial group which is entitled to rule the rest of humanity. Initially promoted by racist theorists such as Arthur de Gobineau and Houston Stewart Chamberlain, Aryanism reached its peak of influence in Nazi Germany. The Germans allegedly were concerned with mixing their blood with Slavic blood, which they deemed inferior.
Connor McDaughey states, in their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. They also established priesthoods and gave alphabets to the races who were unenlightened in such matters up until that time. Ireland is the country in which the arts and the sciences were first discovered and developed. To this country, the Greeks applied the term oigia, a term which was never given to but the very ancient, and it's from the Irish, the Aryans, that the Greeks traced their descent. The term Arya is derived from Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, the ram. The symbolism of the ram is the knowledge of God, or the El, When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he was horned, meaning that he had gained knowledge. Even Michelangelo represents this in his statue of Moses. The word pyramid, pyramid, means paternal power of the ram. In Egyptian culture, many pharaohs took on the name of Rama or Ramses to show their knowledge of God. In Christianity, it's been altered to be lamb instead of God, yet the symbolism of the ram and its meaning is deeply ingrained into nearly all world religions. Conor McDowry states, "To the Irish Magi we owe the discovery of fire and the common grains, which they developed from the grasses. They were the first people to practice agriculture. They invented the common tools of workmanship, which have come down to us practically unchanged from those ancient times. There's no mistaking the monuments left by the Irish, who were once the rulers and masters of the whole earth. Their rule embraced all countries. It was worldwide. Ireland was the first mistress of the seas, and it was the first and only worldwide empire which has ever been known, for it was a spiritual empire."
The Phoenicians is a cover name for a group of people who descended from the great Hyperboreans and established a priesthood in many of these lands after the flood. We know this in history as the Celtic race. However, the connection between the Celtics and Phoenicians is not discussed in modern academic circles. Therein lies the problem. The Phoenicians, or Phoenicians, were once a great race. This is the mother priesthood called the Church of Iessa that the priest in Timaeus is discussing. They came and instructed many of the races after the flood, re-establishing the common traits of civilization. The myths of white red-haired giant mummies are common from around the world. These people were hunted by this new group of rulers as well, for they wanted to destroy the pure bloodline of all races so that they could be the only race of God, creating a new bloodline. This group took over the original priesthood of Iessa, labeled them pagans, stole their history, and enslaved humanity and all other races. They took over the Bible and began teaching that God can only be reached through the Church of Jesus, when that the old teachings were never about belief in authority, but in a beautiful mythos that connected divinity and man as one, as a moral respect for nature, a duty for taking care of all life and spreading peace through a divine cosmology of self, one that had been passed down for generations through studying the stars carefully and aligning them to attributes of ego and self. This is how astrology, or astrotheology, was passed back into the world after the flood of Atlantis. These Jesuits, and the Church of Rome, who really belonged to the Akkadian subrace, not the original Semites, or in other words, Celts, these Akkadians caused war and destruction among the rest of the Aryan nations.
Ironically enough, there's a group of black people today who are also associated with the term Irie, lions and the Irish.
He's in the Black Irish in Montserrat. Shot Twirish O'Rourke.
Unfortunately, it's a bit far to take the wife and family. To be precise, 4,128 miles from Cork, give or take a few. It's on the Emerald Isle, all right, and they'll feel quite at home among its Atlantic beaches, green fields, harps and shamrocks. But the trouble is that this Kinsale is at the wrong side of the Atlantic. It's Kinsale in Montserrat, a West Indian island, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and home of a unique race of people, the Black Irish.
It was under the press ganging of Cromwell that hundreds of people from Cork, Kilkenny and Drogheda were expelled to the West Indies. They would have arrived just as the first importations of African slaves took place. So, both cruelly uprooted from their homes, Irish and African Negro shared a common suffering, a common grievance, and for the most part lived together in peace and common understanding. The home of Mr. and Mrs. Allen is also the local post office. Their soft accents are typical of Montserrat and might easily be confused with the lilt in parts of West Cork.
Now, how did the family come to Montserrat, Mr. Allen?
Well, the Irish people came to Montserrat on account of Cromwell, where was exiled. We heard they had some fighting there, and the Irish people came and they was inside. So they was sent out of the island. So, and we are some of the older descendants.
We have Allens, Daly, Sweeney's, Ryan.
They're all related to you, are they?
They are all one relation.
St. Patrick's Day. On March 17th, individuals around the globe gather to celebrate this Christian missionary by wearing green and drinking a lot. But why do we celebrate St. Patrick? Well, other than helping to convert the entire country of Ireland to Christianity, turns out our patron saint has some rather mythic exploits on his resume. Apparently, St. Paddy used the shamrock to help teach laymen the concept of the Holy Trinity, and he would preach so long that his staff would become rooted in one place. But hands down, my favorite myth is that St. Patrick drove all of the snakes out of Ireland. I mean, how badass do you have to be to take on every serpent in the country?
Enough is enough! I have had it with these snakes on this
island. However, scholars now believe there may be more to this legend than we originally thought. First thing you have to know about Ireland is that there are no snakes. None. And there never were. While there are 3 species of snake commonly found in Britain, there's zero evidence that any of them ever found their way to Ireland. The country's natural land link was made inaccessible by melting glaciers, and unfortunately, that means our little serpentine friends never made it across. But where does the legend come from if St. Paddy had no actual snakes to banish? Now, while there may not have been snakes on Ireland, there were a lot of druids and pagans. Now, the natives of this land practiced an ancient religion, with their own sets of beliefs and traditions. However, these practices weren't seen as legitimate in the eyes of the Christian church, and St. Patrick was sent to convert as many Irish folk as possible. There are several myths, accounts, and legends that detail the conflicts between St. Patrick and Druid priests. Critics of St. Patrick and the Christian church believe that the saint was responsible for hundreds of pagan murders.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
But little evidence supports this theory of violence. However, there are apparently confessions from Paddy himself detailing the burning of nearly 150 Druid books.
We must burn the books, Montag. All the books.
His conflict with the Druid religion is well documented and oft-touted in his own writing. Like the time he literally shattered an enemy priest to pieces in a prayer-off? And it's no secret that snakes and serpents often represent evil and bad in many cultures across the world. While both sides perpetuate larger-than-life explanations for this myth, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Though I'm hesitant to accept the idea that St. Patrick was out in the field battling Druid wizards, I don't find it hard to believe that this legend is an age-old allegory about Christian suppression of ancient religions. This all just goes to show you the power that myths and legend have on culture.
A channel that I will be referring to in this series is Mind Unveiled because it's a good reference point to see those in various communities discussing the subject. The channel is a great watch and I would recommend anyone interested in the subject to check it out. Although he discusses similar concepts on his channel, he does so in an inconsistent manner. This could be not to offend anyone or his own personal bias. He is of the belief that white people come from ancient giant god races mentioned earlier, and his reason for this is if they did, then where does red hair, green eyes come from? But then he also states that he is aware that Moorish and different Berber tribes share many different physical characteristics. He claims white people come from the planet Mercury while the black Fomorians come from the planet Mars. Whether this is true or not, the Greek version of Mars is Aries, which connects the Ari right back to the Moors by this logic. I understand there is no way to discuss this topic in a way that pleases everyone, so unfortunately, you will have to use your own discernment in this matter. Ancient groups being mixed race isn't feasible for a few reasons. If there were generations upon generations of mixed races, and we know the darker melanated people usually dominate genetically when mixed with lighter people, wouldn't most people be at the very least tanned or light brown by this point in human existence? When you consider that arranged marriages were the normal custom in the past, it makes the idea of eugenics that much more feasible. These different groups of people possibly did exist, but it seems likely they were not what we would consider white today. Even with these inconsistencies, I still recommend the channel. It's obvious our current timeline of history has sincerely confused everyone in regard to their origin. I can understand different groups fighting for their existence in the overall narrative, and even if we are given misinformation deliberately. It's important to take everything with a grain of salt and understand that there is always a portion of truth in everything. I will eventually touch on angelic beings and giants, but in a separate video. I would like to first discuss concepts closer to what we would be able to comprehend and apply as it relates to our modern timeline and reality. It's hard to say what role race plays in this overall storyline, but it's obviously a major piece to the puzzle. When did the races swap and why? When did Europeans become white, and why are people described as Moors in history being depicted by white people? Most large quote-unquote truth channels seem to still push the narrative that these were black versus white, pagan versus Christian wars. Why does it seem like they are purposely avoiding the obvious elephant in the room? Either avoiding the esoterics behind Islam and Christianity or avoiding certain aspects of history entirely. Some have eventually acknowledged Moors in their various forms, but only because it would be impossible to discuss certain topics without doing so. Even when acknowledging, they often find ways to stand firm on the current version of history. Some even stating that the Moors were Arab or white people, even with the many annual blackface Moorish festivals across the world implying otherwise. Why believe in flat Earth and every other conspiracy, only to believe the history we were given is mostly accurate?
And this is one of the things that I recognize that's terribly injurious to us, even in our dealings with each other, which will demonstrate as soon as you see them getting together arguing dogma and calling it religion, because most of the masses don't get religion. And that's not an attack on anyone, that's just simply the truth. When believers don't get this information, just adepts. Adepts, whether you're dealing with Skull and Bones, Knights Templars, Knights of Columbus, Eastern Stars, Daughters of Isis, Kyklos, Ku Klux Klan, Union Guard, White Camellia, Skull and Bones, anyone in your mystic degrees, all of them, don't get it twisted, just because they're in Islam or Christianity or Judaism, they're all Kabbalists. Are we clear? Yeah. And all of them know what that Kaaba is in Mecca. All of them do. And we ain't talking about the evils that people do in the name of religion. We're talking about the science that is the true cosmology, Kabbalistic yoga philosophies that comprises religion across the planet. Are we clear? That's where your imams, your rabbis, your ministers, your sheiks, your grand sheiks, your Skull and Bones members, etc., all of them are Kabbalists. Are we clear? All of them are adepts. Are we clear? Because they're dirty, and very few of them are clean, they've created these things that you know as sects. S-E-C-T-S. And those are those little package games they made to divide people against each other in the name of religion when the masses don't get religion.
Although they might say that, you know, they don't represent the conventional Christianity or the conventional Islam and all, but still yet it's still that cult-like atmosphere. And basically, if you're not on the agenda of either being down with their particular leader or their particular God, you see what I'm saying, then it's going to be limited in the way they're going to reach out to the black community and assist each other. So you do have that factor that goes down in the conscious community. So therefore, the ones that's left outside of that doesn't particular put the plateau as far as one particular deity or one particular belief system or one particular leader, those people who don't deal with that, that's on the outside, on the periphery, in the aspect that say we try to deal with all of the black conscious information as a form of black history. So therefore, the Hebrew aspect, we accept that because the simple fact it's a part of our history. Doesn't necessarily mean whether it's 10,000 years old or whether it's 3,000 years old. We deal the same thing with the Islam we deal with, because we understand that all of it is a part of black history, our particular aspect. We know that nobody outside of us put forth those particular systems. And we also know that those particular systems, if you dig deep enough, have their mystical side to them. So therefore, we don't necessarily shut out anybody. That these particular scriptures are nothing but rewritten. They were ancient scriptures that was rewritten to fit a particular movement. Now, take case in point. Good example. We always knew, even in the Afrocentric movement, that we knew that most of these scriptures came out of the libraries of ancient Africa. And we knew that basically the pages of the Bible was nothing but basically rewritten or plagiarized pages of stuff that came out of ancient Kemet. The thing about it is we never really traced those particular, the book of Isaiah, the book of Job, the book of so-and-so, back to see exactly where does it line up with the text, because on the other hand and stuff, we're not privy to a lot of things of research that these Europeans are privy to. Well, the guy Gary Greenberg that wrote the book The Moses Mystery put out this book called The Myths of the Bible, 101 Myths of the Bible, and by Gary Greenberg. And in here, he's literally showing you this is the book of the book of let's say it's I'll give you a good example. The book of give me a Bible, Deuteronomy. Good. Then he'll show you exactly where you can find the same mythology in the Egyptian or the Camite text. And literally, these people just took these particular things and just rewrote them in their political agenda. We're talking about politics here other than the Word of God. So this particular book here is an excellent book, Gary Greenberg book, 101 Myths of the Bible, where they literally go back in and take those particular texts and show you the parallel between that and the Camite text. You see, so if we know that the book of Isaiah, it says, it starts off, you know, well, I'll give you the treasures of darkness. We know that this is a lot of alchemical stuff. It's a lot of Kabbalistic information. And basically, we don't throw anything out because we're all dealing with fragments. You see what I'm saying? We're all dealing with fragments. And that's the difference about really winning the game. Whenever you throw something out and proclaim this as the actual truth, the game stops. And therefore, you become stuck. It's just like the baby with the bathwater. When we threw out the Greek thing, because we understood that the Greeks plagiarized the information from the mystery schools, the Greek philosophy. But Greek mythology was completely black. But if they plagiarized Greek philosophy, you still need to deal with that. You see what I'm saying? But then again, on the other hand, there's this whole story, whether Aristotle or any of these particular people, whether they were black in the first place. What we're talking about here is we have seen a glitch or a break in the old system. Things that we would have never seen before. You see what I'm saying? And this is what's going on here, because that's right there is a form of, despite what we think, there is a certain realm that is coming back in. But it's not coming back in the normal conventional means of what we call liberation and revolution like people think. This thing is, like we say, it's coming back in as a realm of indulgence that they talk about in Robert Johnson's book, Ecstasy, which is a key book. Robert A. Johnson book, Ecstasy, dealing with the whole Dionysian myth. This is the realm of the return of the Bacchanalian realm. Bacchus, that's the Roman form of Dionysus. You know, so that Bacchanalian realm, there is a return. So despite what is being orchestrated or being manipulated on the physical realm, there's a whole energy that when they look up, they're going down. Well, who the fuck is manipulating us? You see, what is making us, because obviously if the mutant, or I'll say the word hybrid, is in control, by him being a hybrid, it also means that he can be manipulated. That's what Kenneth Grant says about C.W. Ledbetter, Blavatsky, and a whole bunch of Europeans during the late 18th century, late 1800s, and the early 20th century, that they were slaves of AWAS. That means that there was entities that used Europeans to get certain works done. You see what I'm saying? So even though you might have a pattern where everybody's lying, every now and then you get a break, where you get one. That's the same with this Gary Greenberg. He wrote the Moses Mystery, and he wrote this book, 101 Myths of the Bible, and all of a sudden, he has the whole New York Times, and he has the whole entire Jewish community saying that he's a pseudo-scholar. But yet this man is he is the head of several archaeological foundations. Gary Greenberg, the author of the Moses Mystery, he is a member of a Society of Biblical Literature, Egypt Exploration Society, American Research Center in Kemet, Egypt, and the Anthropological Institute of America. You see, he has addressed international conferences of Egyptologists, the Society of Biblical Literature, and conferences held in America Research Center in Egypt. You see, he is a senior trial lawyer for a criminal defense division of the Legal Aid Society of New York. So just like Tony Brown said, motherfucker, you coming with big letters. You got the big shit behind you to say that you legitimate, and white people say you legitimate, but yet they're castigating him and calling him a pseudo-scholar. You see what I'm saying? Because he dared tell the truth. You see, so even in this particular aspect here and all, every now and then, something will come up, and they will be slaves. And that's why the Book of Enoch says, you get R.H. Charles, the Book of Enoch, his particular one. Because it was one sister like, man, I just get sick of these white folks and what they writing and all this kind of thing. I said, you better be glad them white folks writing it. I said, no, wait a minute, come on now, let's be honest with this shit. I said, now you got a brother like me and you got a few other brothers out here. We're getting into this particular stuff, and my stuff is 10 years. I say, but if these white motherfuckers didn't write it, you think we was going to wait on niggas to write the shit? We still trying to figure out whether we fucking damn Presbyterian or Baptist. So let's be logical about this shit. Well, I'm glad these white folks did write the book. I don't give a damn what their ulterior motive is and whether they're writing it for white folks. They still was being influenced by a greater entity or a greater power to make sure that this particular information get down here, because if it was left up to niggas, we would never have it. You understand what I'm saying? We would still be talking about whether I damn take communion or whether I get sprinkled on the head or whether some motherfucker baptized me in some goddamn swimming pool. You hear this shit? Oh, you sprinkle, you can't go to heaven. I got baptized in a big plastic swimming pool, so now I'm going to heaven. That kind of ignorant shit. And we're talking about grown motherfuckers. We ain't talking about babies. So therefore we know we can't say this. If it's left up to black people, we have to use some logic behind it. There's always a bigger picture. And that's what we got to look at right now, is the doggone bigger picture. You see what I'm saying? So they always use these particular entities. There ain't nothing to manipulate. So they use them a lot of times to work for them. It's just like some of the hierarchies that's been controlling over us use the white folks. This is one of the main keys right here. The white folks is a decoy to make sure you don't find out about the real enemies, which is a bunch of people manipulating them. Now even David Icke and them, despite his reptilian stuff, they were still talking about it. They then started talking about this shit with the book called The Gods of Eden by William Bramley. And they were saying, no, the damn Illuminati and them motherfuckers is being run by aliens, but they weren't talking. But the aliens that they was talking about was not necessarily some space green people with big eyes. The aliens was entities. That's what Pat Robertson said when he said, oh, there's aliens, but they are angelic. So there's a whole angelic host that we pay homage to that's been ruling this damn shit, and they put the white boy down as the decoy, and you focusing on him. He's a minor player. He's a pawn in the goddamn game. Just like we are pawns to white folks. And other white folks are pawns to white folks. Well, they are pawns to other entities that we'll go deeper into the next 2 days and stuff, because they need to be unmasked. They need to be unmasked.